it's no coincidence that we are in the 8th month of the year talking about inclusion in action, because when we're looking at inclusion, we must look to see where we say yeah, but, you know, where the but is. Oh yeah, you're included, but not this one, or this is included, but not that one. And, you know, this month, as we wrap up this inclusion in action, it doesn't mean that we wrap up our practice of inclusion. We're just wrapping up the conversation that we've been having around inclusion in action. And for the last 2 weeks, we've had amazing messages from Judy Osuna, who delivered an amazing, you know, message last week. And the week before that was, you know, Reverend Kevin, who brought, you know, another message on inclusion in action. And when I look at our community, except for those black boxes with the white letters with the names in them, I mean, even as we look at one another and we look at our photos, our pictures, we are a microcosm of the macrocosm. We are a diverse community. And I bet you, if any one of us called one another and said, I need you, come over. If we were able to jump in a car and come and be of assistance, or send someone to be of assistance, or pray with someone on the telephone, we would include one another in a heartbeat, and we include one another in a heartbeat. And the diversity is here. The practice of inclusion is making sure that there's room at the table. That there is room at the table even for those who think and believe differently than we do, who look different than we do, who behave differently than we do. That at Downey Center for Spiritual Living, that by valuing and empowering all, we inspire a joyous and fulfilling life. And that it's not just words, but we also, because we say this week after week, you know, day after day, month after month, that it calls us to the carpet as to where this is our practice, or where this is just the words that are coming out of my mouth. And especially in today's world, where when we look outside of our spiritual community, we're faced with division and separation. We're faced with name calling. We're faced with hatred and bigotry. We're faced with sexism and racism and all other forms of oppression, classism. Especially now, we get to say, hey, wait a minute, either what we teach is the truth, or let me get off the merry-go-round, because it's false BS. It's a false belief system. Either we believe what we're learning and what we're teaching and what we're speaking of, and then we incorporate it and we look and we scan in our lives where the we hasn't necessarily included people who think differently than we do. And just because people think differently than we do doesn't mean that that is not God expressing in a beautiful and magnificent way. That's why I always speak to that we're building a love-minded community, that there is enough love in our hearts and in our actions that even though folks might be speaking a different language or have a different political view from one another, a different race, a different age, a different sexual orientation, a different ability, different color hair, whatever it is, that just because it may be different from what we have or who I am, it doesn't exclude. We include. Yes, of course, there is room at our table. And that came out so beautifully in Judy's talk, in Reverend Kevin's talk, in my talks earlier this month. And I'm reminded of Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez, who says that change takes courage. Change takes courage. And what I know is that as spiritual people, we have exactly what it takes to fully step forth into our practice of inclusion. And so I just want to, give a public thanks to the team members who actually put together the outline for this month's talks, Inclusion in Action. They include Reverend Michelle Senegal, Reverend Rafe Ellis, Reverend Sharon Mitchell, Reverend Alex Escudero, Rebecca Hiroka, who's a practitioner, Reverend Raymond Anderson, Efrain Rios, who's a practitioner, Alvin Seeley, Lynn Daniels, who's a practitioner, Reverend Steph St. Amant, and Reverend Mark Gilbert. All of the talks this month have been provided through materials that they have put together as outlines that Reverend Kevin and our practitioner Judy Osuna have put together and have used and synthesized and added our own spice and flavor to deliver this month's message. So today, as a culmination, what they have so lovingly done for us is they've put together a community statement that I would love for us to just dissect this morning and see if we could try it on for size. And by that, I mean, just because we have a vision and mission statement doesn't mean that you fully agree with it. But at some point, you try it on for size and you kind of go, oh yeah, this is beginning to fit, or this is a little bit too big. I haven't grown into that yet. Kind of like when you're buying kids clothes and they're too large, they haven't grown into them yet. And so I would love for us to just kind of take a look at a couple of the phrases that that have been developed for us to see how this fits for us, and for us to actually see what this means for us and what it might look like if we actually adopted this way of living and loving and being in the world as a community. Now, we've, of course, adopted it for today in our slides. And for those of you who are calling, I'm going to read it so that you can hear what it says. And we'll take it piece by piece. This is a community statement of inclusion. It's also known as an affirmation, but it says, we, Downey Center for Spiritual Living, are a community that celebrates diversity, fosters inclusion, champions inner work, creates space for courageous, vulnerable conversations. So I want to pause right there. What does that bring up for you? Can we see that slide one more time, Reverend Kevin, please, since you're in the driver's seat right now? I appreciate you. We are a community that celebrates diversity, fosters inclusion, champions inner work, and creates space for courageous, vulnerable contributions. That's what we're saying that Downey Center for Spiritual Living is, that this is who we are. What does this feel like for you? And just as important is, what are the objections or the question marks? Where do you think we can actually grow and be better as a community in that statement? I want to open it up and just invite folks to unmute to speak to that. Go ahead, Janet.
I kind of think bottom line, it just means whatever we need to say, it's a safe place that we can say it.
Mm.
You know?
And why is that important to you? Why is having a safe place to say what I need to say or to say what you need to say? Why is that important for you, Janet?
I think because we are all diverse.
Yeah.
And earlier when we were talking about our vision, I got, as Bertha got the separateness of people, I got that we were collective together as people. So I just think it's a place where I can say what I just said. We're diverse and we're collective. You know, if we have to say different things, it doesn't offend anyone.
And frankly, Janet, sometimes what someone might have to say and what I might have to hear, especially as the community director, sometimes it might hurt because it might be true. Not that anyone's trying to curse me out or curse you out or anything like that, but when people speak of their experience, right? You know, sometimes it's quite eye-opening. And do we have a community? And are we growing and developing a community where we can have courageous conversations? I mean, as an organization, our organization has been looking at a lot of ways that we have been practicing inclusion, and in a lot of ways how we've been an exclusive organization. And when it's happening from our headquarters and all of the centers around us, we too get an opportunity to kind of like look under the hood and see, you know, are we walking our talk?
Yeah, walking our talk.
Beautiful. Thank you. Go ahead, Bertha. Unmute yourself, please.
Okay, so I'm going to speak from the perspective of a person of color. I came into this philosophy like 30 years ago at the Lakewood Center of Spiritual, and it was all white. And what bothered me wasn't that it was white and I was a person of color. What bothered me, I worked in an inner city school, and as I became aware of the philosophy and how it changed my life, and it didn't matter if you're in a place of poverty or if you're a place of affluence, the philosophy changes your life either way. So I always just wanted a community that reflected me and reflected the community I had dedicated my life to. And, but I still, you know, I still love the philosophy, love the people, love my minister. But I did feel, I didn't feel excluded just because of the way this works. In another church with the same demographic, I would have felt separate. And then I walked into Downey Center of Spiritual, and you're there, and Hannah's there, and Mert's there, and Bill's there, and Gary's there. And it's just, I have to say that it has, I'm just at a whole different level in my spirituality, thanks to Downey Center for Spiritual Living. It started with religious science, and now I just feel, literally, you are all in my, and Mert shared this with me, it's also true of her, you're in my daily prayer of gratitude at night. The center, the ministers, the practitioners, you know, every single practitioner, which includes us, and it's just so much gratitude. So yes, Downey Center for Spiritual Living is actually accomplishing this goal, in my opinion, and in my life, definitely.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. So let's take a look at the second, the next slide to this statement and see how this fits for us. It says, we are a community that honors the unique emanation of God that each person embodies, advocates with people for human rights and dignity for all. So we're a community that honors the unique emanation of God, that each person embodies, advocates with people for human rights and dignity for all. Now, I gotta tell you, at some point, this might start feeling a little bit different for us. That, you know, we're a community that embodies, advocates for people, with people for human rights and dignity for all. So what does that bring up for you as you hear that? Is that who we are? Is that who we're stepping into being? How does that feel for you? Jen, what does that sound like for you? I'm just going to call on you because you're a practitioner. What does that feel like for you when you hear that that's who we are? Especially because you're a practitioner at our center. Is that something that you resonate with?
Yes, and I think what it is for me is the statement as it's read, as it's written, as it's put forth, is a constant stepping stone of challenge for me.
Mm.
Because I know that if I am clear and honest about how I see the world every day, that I have much work to do. You can go back to the other screen, and I have inner work that is constant for me, that I can be pulled and pulled. And I can know that I'm being pulled, and I'm still pulled. And so when you make a statement about us, that everyone emanates from that reality of spirit, that's where the old phrase, the rubber meets the road, for me every day, because a statement like that, if I pay attention to it and I own it, makes me have to look at who I really am and who we are. So
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you for that. Go ahead, George. I appreciate you raising your hand too, George. Thanks.
Well, this just brings up some things. You know, I've been around in science of mind in times where, you know, people were saying, well, we don't do political stances. And some people might read this and say, that's a political stance. And to be honest, I really like that, because I feel that our convictions in the world and our belief that in a world that works for everyone, and a belief in valuing and empowering all, is a political statement. You know, anything that's our conviction in the world and our beliefs and our systems that we want to follow, I think is a political statement. And so I hear this, and it allows me to take a breath and kind of sigh and say, thank goodness, thank God, you know, that we're committing to this, that we're understanding this about ourselves, that it's not just some airy-fairy out there, you know, thing to be one, but one is actually, I think, requires convictions like this and remembrances for myself every day of this, and pulling myself back in by using statements like this one you just showed.
Thank you, George. Yeah, and it goes back to the first statement that we champion inner work, just like Jan said, that we champion the inner work. Oh, so if the rubber hits the road, or if this is a rub right here, or if I'm not, if I can't say yes to this, like what part of this statement is not God? We're a community that honors the unique emanation of God that each person embodies. That means that just as people show up, that I honor that unique emanation, that person, that individual, that I honor that emanation of God, that I recognize that right where that flamboyant or whatever label I want to give that person, that right where that person is the unique, magnificent emanation of God, and that person is embodying the allness of God in that moment. And that we're a community that advocates for for human rights and for dignity for all. Because if all is God, if each and every one of us is God, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we say, hey, wait a minute, that's God right there. What are you doing? That's God. Look, that's God right there. Absolute human dignity for all. Yeah. Absolutely, not special rights, human dignity for all of humanity, because all of humanity is the unique and unrepeatable way that God is showing up. I mean, I don't ever want to have to question if any of you would stand up for me. Ever. I would never want any of you to question if I would stand for you, for your dignity, for your human rights, for your right to breathe and live. There should never be a question in this spiritual community. It should never be a question for anyone. That's who we are. And when we have the yeah, but, or the, oh, I have areas to grow. That's where we get to have our courageous conversations with each other. Like, I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet at the we, at the all of us. I still think that, just some of us should have it, but I'm willing to grow. I'm willing to see that I still have that hidden belief. That's why the work with our practitioners is so crucial and important. So we can pull out those areas where we still do believe in separation. Oh no, they shouldn't do that. They shouldn't live in this area. This is a nice area. The minute they come in, the minute you let one of them in, there goes the neighborhood. Like what part of human dignity for all? What part of, when we say that we're not recognizing the God emanation of that person? And then lastly, the last slide then, as we look at really wrapping up this idea of inclusion as a practice, as a way of living, is we are a community that blesses each other. We are a community that sees holiness in all life. We are a community that remains learners and listeners so that we can grow together. And we are a community that understands that oneness is not sameness. Yes, we are one. Yes, we are one, but oneness is not sameness. My experience in this body, being born with these demographics, has afforded me a life that it hasn't afforded other people. You living in your body with your demographics, with your labels, has afforded you a life that others haven't been afforded. Some might call it liabilities, some might call it gifts, some might call it unearned privileges. But oneness is not sameness. Oneness is not sameness. And when we recognize that, and yet when we see each other and when we greet each other, recognizing that the holiness of all life is right where we are, where each other is, and we bless one another. Am I blessing you or am I cursing you? When I see the news or when I see things happening in the world, am I blessing or am I cursing? And it doesn't matter who it is. I want you to know that I pray for our elected officials, our president. I pray for all elected officials throughout the world. I bless them. I bless them in a way that I want to be blessed. And now, does it take work? Absolutely. There are a lot of elected people all over the place, and and they don't believe like I believe, but I bless them because they're in a leadership position for a reason. And I get to see that their life is the life of God. And it takes work. It takes work for people who are not nice to one another, but I bless them. Why? Because I know that that is the life of God right there. May be confused. It may not know what we know, but I can bless them or curse them. It's always up to me. And so what I want to have coming from me is the blessing, so that something happens. Because the moment I see that that is the life of God, and the moment that we continue to not keep Downey Center for Spiritual Living the best kept secret in town, and these spiritual principles, the moment that we continue to share these principles through our living, we got to prove that this stuff works in our own life. And so if we're not loving and supporting one another and blessing each other and seeing the holiness in all life and remaining listeners and learners, this is how we must live. And having these conversations, even offline, off of a Sunday, having these conversations, like this is where we grow. This is where we actually create a world that works for everyone, where we practice forgiveness. Because forgiveness is actually being in a place of power. When I forgive, I'm in the place of power. When I love, I'm in the place of power. And then the last slide says, and we, Downey Center for Spiritual Living, know that the beloved community is revealed when we love each other well.
That we do.
Yeah, when we love each other well. When we love each other well. And so, beloveds, I'm so grateful that today, when we're absolutely honest with ourselves, we can actually recognize our growth edges. We can see where we've been exclusive. And we can see where we can begin to practice inclusion. Now I see two hands up quickly. And so I want to invite the two of you to speak succinctly as we begin to wrap up today's discussion. Go ahead, Gary, and then Sunny Day.
Well, thank you for this message today, because what I get from this are the empowerment and that emanation of spirit. And when I look at that, the fact that we can all be one, and yet each of us has this uniqueness, and to empower the unique emanations that each one of us has, I think is one of our chief tasks. Because when we each contribute, that contributes to the all. And that's what makes all of this work, is each one of us, that unique gift, that unique emanation. And that brings the whole group together, because each one of us has our unique part to play. So I resonate with that, and thank you for that message today.
Thank you, Gary. Sunny Day?
Yes, I concur with gratitude for this message. And Gary said something that just added a little twist to what I wanted to say. So thank you. What comes to mind is for me to remember and to remind those who are with me and who I speak with, and about the subject of the election, and that it is okay for me to rally for injustice. It is okay for me to rally on the underrepresented, for the underrepresented, and to remember that it is the for that I am focusing on and not the against, which I don't want to focus on. So it is okay for me to rally for the justice, especially at this time, but without exclusivity. And without exclusivity in my heart and without it in my speech. So to speak what I'm for and not what I am against is my work.
Thank you, Sunny. We are a community that advocates for human rights and dignity for all, for all. And all means all, and that's all means. And so let's just take a moment quickly. I know we have exceeded our agreed upon time, and so I thank you for your presence. And as I simply close my eyes and invite you to do the same, I recognize that one power, one presence, one life that is in me, that has created everything out of itself, and that it is living as me. And as I know that it is living as me, I recognize that it is living as each and every one. That all life is a unique, unrepeatable way that God is living in human form and in all form. And so in that essence, we are one. And the variety and the difference is beautiful and amazing and just glorious. And as I remember how glorious this diversity is, I remember our oneness, that expressing in, that back of all things, expressing as all things, is this power and presence in life. And so I'm reminded of that truth. I'm reminded that this is our only truth. And if we were only to focus on this, that this truth would make us free. And so I give thanks for our time together. I give thanks for the contributions of how we support one another, how we support one another with our words of blessings, with our financial gifts, how we bless one another with our presence and with our listening and with our learning. Grateful for all of this, I simply give thanks. I give thanks for the lesson today. And I know that we use it as spiritual food, as nourishment, as we go forth, living and loving, valuing and empowering all, inspiring a joyous and fulfilling life. Una vida plena y alegre. So for this and so much more, I give thanks, blessing us all. I simply say, it is so. And so it is. And so it shall be.
So it is. Thank you so much, Reverend Sunshine.